So Gottfredson and Hershey modify at least Hershey's theories on social control into an overall general theory of crime. The interesting thing about this particular theory, and the authors find this a pretty salient and important theory in criminology, because it's attempting to predict all deviant behavior, not just criminal or delinquent behavior. And their argument for this is that all this behavior is very similar. It's essentially the same. It's all seeking to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. This is taking the rational choice theories to its ultimate conclusion. For these theorists, crime and deviant are acts of force or fraud undertaken in pursuit of self-interest. The difference lies not in the behaviors, but to some extent into the individuals themselves. And this behavior cannot always be explained by social bonds, but can also be explained in self-control. Major causes of low self-control, ultimately bad parenting or ineffective child rearing, and essentially what's the result of the absence of socialization, or at least effective socialization in a child's life. For these two theorists, there's 6 elements that construct low self-control. The first is criminal acts provide immediate gratification of desires. We are an immediate gratification society. If I can't have it now, I want it before now. That's the way we think these days. Criminal acts provide easy or simple gratification of desires. I need money, therefore I rob a store. I have money. Criminal acts are exciting, risky, or thrilling. The idea of adrenaline sports and adrenaline acts of deviance fall into this category. Crimes provide few or meager long-term benefits. So crime is not a career. It's merely an act to get you through a short period of life or hardships. Crimes require little skill or planning, and crimes ultimately often result in pain or discomfort for the victim. One of the essential elements of the general theory of crime is the element of social or self-control, and how the elements of self-control relate to stable individuals. So for these theorists, once a person with low self-control is established, they will always be a person with low self-control. And the establishment of low self-control usually happens pretty early in one's life. So once you get there, you're stuck. You can't grow out of or change out of low self-control. And it may vary in the ability or opportunity for individuals to engage in deviance. Coming back to Jamila and Rashad and applying the general theory of crime, we see a perfect contrast of self-control. Jamila has a lot of self-control, and her self-control is established by the time that she's about 8 years old. She had a stable childhood. Unfortunately, Rashad did not. He was forced into the life of crime by the age of 8. Deviant behaviors after 8 can be explained by a level of social control and one's opportunity to deviate. Rashad engaged in deviant acts over an extended period of time, but Jamila had more opportunities to avoid deviance, whereas Rashad was trapped in the old neighborhood. Jamila was taken in by another family and given a whole another set of social choices. And these different levels of deviance ultimately equal different levels of social control, or social of self-control, not social control. I'm talking about. That brings us to life course theory, Sampson and Lobb's life course theory, which is attempting to explain the stages and trajectories of deviance over the course of a life. Social bonding opportunities can change with changes in life events. This is different than the general theory of crime and low self-control that's established early on in your life. This theory, Sampson and Lobb's life course theory, it states that there are important places in your life where things can change. A trajectory that was going one way can change and go another way. A trajectory is a pathway or a line of development over a lifespan that refers to long-term patterns of behavior and is marked by a sequence of transitions. A transition is shorter or a specific life event that is embedded in a trajectory. A good example of life on a working class trajectory. The book uses a person born in a working poor neighborhood. Essentially, they come from parents who had stable, low-paying jobs. They got a high school education, ended up working in the service sector, low-paying service sector. You can see how the trajectory is starting to take shape. And then they marry and get into an entry-level position in your in-laws' furniture business, which has much more room for advancement. Now, the job itself might pay the same as the job that you were working, but over time, you might be able to work your way up in the organization itself because you're married into the family. So the trajectory for a working poor lifestyle of barely making ends meet, always working in the service sector, always worrying about the likelihood that you might lose your job, well, that's interrupted, and a new trajectory is formed when you're married and you find yourself in a new job with new opportunities. Life course theory also thinks or takes in consideration age-graded theories of informal social control, or age-graded theories of informal social control, where social bonds between members of society and wider social institutions, family, school, and work play an important part in the socialization process and preventing one from engaging in deviant behavior. As you can imagine, early on in life, a family, school, and maybe pastors and priests from religious institutions are going to play an important role. But as children move into adolescence and young adulthood, peers and media are going to take a much larger role in the socialization process. And then finally, when they become adults, they'll begin to be resocialized in the work environment. Life events may have an effect on the likelihood to persist or desist with deviance. So you could be on a trajectory that is going to lead you to a life in crime. You end up coming across somebody who changes your life chances, and all of a sudden you find yourself on a path that is less criminally deviant and more socially acceptable. There are three components to the life course theory. Strong bonds to family and school during childhood makes deviance less likely. Another aspect of it is if you're not a deviant as a teen, you're less likely to be a deviant as an adult. And important life events in adulthood have the likelihood of changing a trajectory. This is just very different than the general theory of crime. These theorists believe quality over quantity. In order for significant transitions to take shape, there must be quality transitions or a cohesive commitment to changing. Moffat claims that there are two offender groups in this life course theory. The life course persistent group, where deviance stems from a neurodevelopment process, and here we see individuals are predicted to be fairly consistent in deviant behavior. And then adolescence limited, where a larger group creates a deviance that stems from social processes over time. And as they engage in these processes over time, and they move past adolescence into adulthood, they're most likely going to stop engaging in the deviant behavior. What's an application of life course theory? Well, in general, the likelihood of crime rises sharply in teen and late teen years, and then it drops off. So something usually happens in adult lives that make them reconsider engaging in deviant and criminal behavior as they enter into their life, their adult life. Stephen Meiser finds that the age-crime relationship is extremely strong, but varied for the types of crimes. We find young people engaging in most of the crime, and as they move away from adolescence and young adulthood, they don't engage in as much crime. Age-crime relationships exist because people go through stages of deviance at different ages. Coming back to Jamila and Rashad, while the siblings had different life courses, both started on the same trajectory. Jamila was given an opportunity or a transition that changed her trajectory from a life of potential crime to a life which allowed her to become a nurse. Rashad, on the other hand, his life transitioned at his grandparents' death into a trajectory or a pathway to deviant behavior, and no additional transition came along to knock him off that path, and therefore he ends up as a drug dealer. There are, of course, some empirical studies looking at life course and other social control theories. Studies focusing on families simultaneously studying structure and processes have found that family structures are not a significant predictor of delinquency once family process has been added into the variable mix. Family structure had an indirect effect on delinquency through measures of family process. But what we're getting here is the family is where a lot of this socialization should go on, and if it breaks down, we can begin to see or predict deviant behavior. Some more studies of attachment and juvenile delinquency are indicating that attachment can be measured in a variety of ways. So this idea of attachment, whether you're attached or detached from your family, can be seen in reference to love or affection, interest or concern, support and help, caring and trust, encouragement, other measurements overall, home quality, discipline, supervision, level of conflict. These are all variables that you can look at to ultimately understand levels of attachment and then how they may impact whether one is going to engage in deviant behavior or not.